Until these issues are addressed and the recommendations are looked at within the weighted student formula, we just don't believe that this is now the time to move forward with the weighted student formula, especially with how it impacts English learners and low-income students. So hopefully there will be more discussion. Stakeholders will be at the table for this. Thank you.
Well, let me, I on the one hand agree, on the other hand need to be brutally honest and realistic with you and everybody else in this room. The governor has proposed it in his budget. So that's our starting point. It's not a question of, well, should we consider it or not, or are we ready? The governor has put it in his budget. And hold on, let me finish. And it's not a final product. We still have the whole May revise and opportunity to weigh in. Senator Leno, we've had multiple conversations about this. He's the chair of the budget committee, and it was his intention to be here today. It worked out that he wasn't able to. The budget committee, as you can imagine, is going through a lot of issues in education and outside of education. So a big part of the value of having this conversation in the form of this subcommittee is to flesh out these particular issues. So I say that as an opportunity, in a way, to recognize your input, your comments, your recommendations. Not just I'm taking them seriously, or the members are talking amongst each other, but I wouldn't be exactly holding my breath for a big stage before the Senate Budget Committee or the Joint Budget Committee in the next couple of months to have this conversation, and a lengthier conversation at that, on these issues.
Right.
It's happening now.
I just would like to say, we have an opportunity to do it right the first time. We need to learn from our past mistakes.
That's why we're here.
And, and so that's why I'm here, and that's why you're here, and we're hoping that you listen and take our recommendations seriously. On the issue of the incentives, the adverse incentives to keep an English learner identified, keep a student identified as an English learner. I've been hearing that for all the years that I've been representing CABE and Californians together. And, I would really like to see the data on that. I've heard that. I haven't seen the data. I haven't seen any fiscal analysis that's been done on school districts, a good sampling across the state between different types of districts, schools, regionally, rural, urban, to really see, is that really what's happening?
I agree. I want to hear from the other folks, but I hear it as well. I haven't seen it either. That's why we keep asking about it. But I think today I sense a shift in the conversation from, well, you can continue to pursue that or dwell on that, or what may be more strategic is this outcomes-based way of looking at things in that framework.
Thank you.
But thank you. Next presenter, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman Padilla and members of the Select Committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on behalf of the families of English language learner students. My name is Raquel Gomez, and I am a parent of school-aged children and an education advocate who knows firsthand the struggles ELL families face in moving their children toward reclassification. As the Assistant Director for Community Initiatives with Community Services and Employment Training in Tulare County, a community action agency charged with fighting the causes of poverty, our most challenging work is our efforts to engage families in advocating for educational improvements for their English learning children. Tulare, as you know, is a high-poverty county that has endured its fair share of economic crisis, making education more important than ever for our families who depend on public schools. Our county has more than 75% of the student population as classified English language learners, but less than 10% of those students ever achieve reclassification, placing them at the highest risk for dropping out of school. As an advocate and a parent, our community and indeed our state cannot afford to lose these children to inadequate and substandard systems that can and should support them to and through reclassification, A through G access, and higher education completion. The good intentions of policymakers, educators, advocates, and other concerned citizens does not mean that families do not encounter significant systemic barriers that impair their ability to guide, monitor, and support their children toward reclassification. We work with a number of families every day who are not aware of their students' EL status. Most families think that their children are on track for graduation in college. But as one mother, Mrs. Garcia, found out, despite her child's good grades, he was not on track to graduate, let alone attend college. She said to me, "My child brings home good grades, mostly A's and B's. What do you mean he's not going to attend? He can't attend a university?" When we reviewed his transcripts with her, we pointed out that he was taking EL classes, remedial courses, and not the classes he needs to graduate or to prepare him for college. Our families find that schools are not informing parents or helping them understand their child's academic status and progress toward college readiness. It is our organization, CSET, and not the school that has helped Mrs. Garcia and other parents to understand their children's status. We know that while many parents, and particularly those low-income immigrant parents, may not know how to successfully navigate the system, they do understand the important role that education plays in carving a pathway out of poverty and for their children and for generations to come. As an organization working with community and with countless families like the Garcia family, we have an important role to play in helping to improve the education system for our children. Working as part of the Families Improving Education Initiative has given CSET an opportunity to engage families and schools as partners to develop solutions. Our superintendent and board members have committed to working with families to improve practices so that they are able to meet the needs of English language learner families. Together, we are advocating for better communication and increased accountability across the district. And that is including phone messages from schools in both English and Spanish, especially those schools with high percentages of ELLs. Schools taking a more proactive role in notifying parents of their child's status in regards to ELL, and helping parents understand the reclassification process that we are aware is different in every school district almost. Greater accountability for tracking and monitoring the number of students who reclassify each year, with specific goals each year to improve reclassification rates. Schools making better use of parent-teacher conferences and other opportunities to inform and communicate each student's progress towards reclassification. School site supports for ELL parents, such as workshops on the reclassification process and tips and tools to support their students at home and school. While policymakers consider various ways to bring together or bring greater attention and resources to California's English language learner students, including budgetary considerations such as the weighted student formula, please remember that parents need support too. We need to ensure proposed policy solutions maintain parental role in decision-making through school site committees such as the ELAC or the DLAC and school site councils. But solutions cannot and should not solely focus on site-based improvements, but must also consider the critical role families play as their child's first, most important, and lifelong teacher. Provide better ways to remove barriers for families so that they have the knowledge, the skill, and the confidence to support their child's academic success. Prioritizing the partnership between schools and families as a key strategy for improving the academic success of our EL students and all students of color, policymakers can champion these efforts through the legislative and budgetary process. Doing so will empower schools, board members, teachers, and families to share collective responsibility in reversing the current trends so that all children have the opportunity to fully participate and contribute to the economic and democratic fabric of our society. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you again. Like others, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to testify before this group. My name is Teresa Walter, and I'm the Director of the Office of Language Acquisition for San Diego Unified School District. And in that role, we oversee and work with programs for English learners and other programs as well. And I think I was asked to come here primarily because we, as we're looking toward this work or toward this change, we want to really make sure we're holding on to what has been effective and what has been working. And in our district, we have had some really steady and good gains over the last 5 years, I would say, related to English learner achievement. If we look at both AYP, the federal accountability, as well as API, our district has grown consistently in this time frame. And I should back up by saying within that time frame, one of the things that happened, several things happened in San Diego and in our district. Like many, there are a few changes. But about 5-6 years ago, the superintendent at the time, the deputy superintendent at the time, stated that he wanted a real focus, a strong focus on the achievement of English learners. and with that, bringing in and establishing some practices and systems that would support them. So again, in that same time frame, in terms of AYP, we've had a 76% increase in English learner subgroup that's become proficient in English, moving from 23.7 proficient in 2006 to 41.8, so that's about a 76% increase in English language arts, and about a 40% increase in math. And similarly, with the state accountability, API, we went from API score for the EL subgroup of 630 to 717 in 2011, which is an 87-point gain. But it's also, I think, significant to note that each of those 5 years, we've had double-digit increases of our EL subgroup. So, and when we're looking at that, what matters, and I think what makes a difference, is we held on to and we really started focusing on instruction, which is interesting. It's not something I've heard much about in these conversations. But we wanted to look at really quality instruction for English learners, all students, of course, but really what does it take to provide the educational experiences and the instruction day to day that will move students along. And in that, we also wanted to look at the variety or the typology of English learners, because they're not all the same. And so often our conversation creates or presents English learners as a monolith. And we know that there's a huge range of needs and a huge range of requirements, depending on who they are. If you have a student who comes to you brand new to the country, brand new to schooling, and is 13 or 14, their needs are going to be very different than a student who comes to you in kindergarten, brand new to English and brand new to schooling. In San Diego, each year of our new students, about 70% of them enroll at the kindergarten level. And I think this is true in California also, as about half of those were born here. So they are native children born in the United States, but they enroll primarily at kindergarten, but also across the grade levels. And then as we're looking at how students progress over the years, over time, I think time and program, I've heard that mentioned a couple times as well, is another significant factor. As we were looking, though, again, back at the instruction that we provided, we focused on quality English language development, making sure that we can strengthen it and provide that focused, targeted instruction on how English works, and then mapping it right into the day-to-day work that students need to do at their grade level so that they can meet those grade level academic standards, but they're also developing the English language support that enables them to do that. We also looked at building teacher capacity, and this was a huge issue, and it continues to be. So many of our teachers in the state of California and in San Diego are excellent at what they do in providing good quality instruction, but many of them didn't really know how to differentiate or how to meet the needs of, again, English learners at various levels of proficiency. So we focused much of our attention on professional development in a systematic, sequential kind of way that would build our own internal capacity and our teacher capacity. And right alongside of that is our biliteracy programs. We want to strengthen and rebuild our biliteracy programs in our district to advantage our students and give them every opportunity, again, what I've heard here in a couple different places, to develop full proficiency, listening, speaking, reading, and writing in 2 languages, if not more. And we recognize that that's a long-term path that will truly advantage them in the future. So we have also adopted, prior to California, actually, the Seal of Biliteracy, and I think that's one of the strengths that is contributing to our students' work, or our students' success, is that we're really looking at all the different ways we can advantage students. We've also looked at developing expertise at every school site, and this also is, in addition to teacher quality, is bringing experts on site. And we've used a lot of our funding to help do this. We call them English learner support teachers, who will work at the school sites as advocates for students, to watch to make sure that the students, as you mentioned, really do understand that there's a pathway to graduation. We've adopted the new A to G requirements as a district for graduation, and we want to make sure that those expectations are held high for all of our students at every campus. So we're focusing and we're working on that with support that will bring expertise about best practice, information in terms of pathways to graduation and success in college, and also working with families and parents to make sure that those connections are also very strong at the school site level. And then we've also invested in resources and materials and looking at resources in a variety of ways, including time, the time that it takes to add this focus and this work with our students. In addition to all of that, we want to make sure that we're mapping all of this on to strong core curriculum. As we're looking at the new Common Core standards, we think that's also really important. But all of this work that we need to do to support all English learners and bring them up to that level so that all of them have equal opportunity and equal outcomes for success means that we need to add it on top of that core base program. So I know that we've heard the discussion around the issues of adequacy, the issues of the double challenge English learners and English learners who come from poverty backgrounds face. I think that's real, and I think that really does need to be considered and looked at as well. Again, the needs of English learners are quite different. And also, when we're looking at in terms of flexibility, I know working at a school district that there are huge pressures on school districts throughout to use these funds to fill in gaps and to look at ways the way the budgets are holes are being created in other ways, that it would be it's very important to me to make sure that these funds will reach the English learners that they're intended to, that we're able to maintain that focus, which is above and beyond what a base program would be, and that we can continue that for our students as well. When some of the questions arose around weighting formula, and I mentioned again the needs of English learners, how different they are, one option that could be considered perhaps is to look at weighting of the needs of English learners perhaps based on time that they've been with us. The greatest need, I think, for our English learners are those in the first 2 to 3 years of being with us. So maybe that would be a weighted, the students who were with us for maybe 0 to 4 years have a higher weight, and then the students who have been with us for 3 to 6 years, their weight could go down a little bit. And then 6 years and above, including reclassified English learners, can continue. Because one of the things that I also think is important if we really care about progress and looking at how kids are achieving over time, is that we continually look at our reclassified English learners' success as well. Some of the statements I've heard about English learners, 10% will reach proficiency each year. That's probably true, but there's a couple of factors and some nuanced information I think that also needs to be factored in. In our district, about a third of our English learners are at kindergarten, first grade level, and those students aren't reclassified until you get CST scores and other scores that would enable them to be reclassified. So they typically aren't even in the mix in terms of eligibility for that. And also in our district, by the time our students are in high school, about 3/4, about 60-something% of students who entered our schools as an English learner have been reclassified by the time they're in high school. And of those students, they are outperforming our district as a whole. Our reclassified students in our district are. So we do have evidence of success, but we need to continue to keep that whole story, I think, intact. And that way we can also focus on the specific needs of students like our long-term English learners who do remain, and they are a specific need, so that we can craft programs and supports and tools that will really meet their needs. And the needs of all don't get evaporated. The needs of each subgroup or each individual needs don't somehow just sort of get so embedded in the system that they become invisible and we're not able to support them. So I would recommend, and I encourage us to continue to look at those issues, both with flexibility, in terms of flexibility, and in an adequacy of the base program as well as we move forward with this.
Okay. Thank you very much. Karen, before you start, let me do this because I know the hour is late. If there's something that you feel compelled to share right now, I welcome it. If not, let me just ask one or two questions of the other three panelists, because after this and before public comment, I want to call back both the department and LAO just to kind of get your thoughts and reactions to what we've all heard today. But the way Ms. Walter just sort of ended her comments was a great transition to the last big question I had for the three of you and for today, and that is, we've gone back and forth on a lot of the issues, the accountability measures, the funding ideas, this and that. But you're the first to touch specifically on this long-term English learner or English learners who have been in that classification for more than the few years that we hope it takes for most students to successfully be reclassified, and maybe seeing them in a unique way from a data collection standpoint, from a funding standpoint, just to acknowledge that trend and that dynamic. So I'll invite the others to maybe comment on your thoughts based on your experience, on your research, your advocacy. Is there, what other distinctions are there between English learners overall and English learners that have been in that classification for many years?
There was a study that was conducted in last year or the year before by Dr. Lori Olson that took a look at the experience of long-term English learners. And so there are several reasons as to why these students, after 6 years, still remain at the secondary level as English learners. And one of the reasons is because there's no way for the district to be able to identify them as a long-term English learner. There's just one identification, and that's English learner. And the data that's required to be provided is based on an English learner. And so these students have sort of fallen through the cracks, for the lack of a better word. And so when they took a look at the factors, they also saw that the instructional needs for these long-term English learners were quite different than perhaps the instructional needs that were required of our English learners in the elementary level, and that the teachers needed to be given more professional development specific to instructional strategies that would work with these long-term English learners. So that's just sort of like off the top of my head that I can remember, just based on the research. So we do have recommendations that are contained in the research, and the first would be to try to identify these kids before they become English learners. And when they took a look at the data, they saw that at the fourth grade there were signs that if the district would have looked at English learners at the fourth grade, there are signs there that if they would have known them, could have prevented these students from becoming long-term English learners at the secondary level. Karen may know more, and you may want to comment in terms of the practical effects at the district level on that.
I'll just add to the research that you're referring to. You know, she's put in a book, Dr. Lori Olson. It's called Reparable Harm, and it's excellent. And it does talk about some of the ways we can prevent it, and really monitoring and looking at the growth of English learners over time, and seeing that we have also really high levels of expectation, that what we're expecting of all students is as of a rigorous, high-level curriculum, and that English learners throughout their time with us have had opportunities to participate and learn in those high, engaging, Common Core standards type of rigorous expectations and curriculum and instruction. In addition, what we also find is that their needs often parallel the needs at the higher level, high school, of other students who are struggling academically, and a real focused intervention that looks at explicitly developing and expanding academic language, access to high-level instruction, and engagement and additional targeted support is important. But it is that their needs are very different than a beginning English learner or a progressing English learner.
And actually, one of the comments I was going to make relates directly to that, because I actually worked with long-term English learners, and it's interesting that before that report came out, these learners, I worked at the community college level, and they're called Generation 1.5, and it was the same thing. It was the fact that they get once they're reclassified, redesignated, then they're not identified, and then the issues come up because they're still struggling with the acquisition of English. And as we look at this new weighted formula, one of the other pieces that the superintendent is really considered. One of the statements I wanted to make is even after reclassification, they need, English learners may occasionally need academic support. And presently, as was stated, once they're reclassified, we don't track that data because we're not required to. So as the state discusses rebuilding our fiscal and education policy, we must also address the ongoing needs of the English learner, and it may be something to consider that if the state's going to spend billions of dollars to help students overcome their language barriers, and then not provide targeted academic support, we kind of leave them hanging. And I think that's where the system does need to be changed. But my caution is this: we have a system right now of that is our accountability system and how we're monitoring that. And then we have a proposal for something new. But in between, we're doing a lot of things right now, interventions. I mean, the Irreparable Harm Report actually had a lot of impact across the state, where districts started to really look at their long-term English learners and say, well, what is it that we're doing? And also this notion of different typologies of English learners. So we're at a space right now where these discussions are happening, and I want to acknowledge, and bringing in parents and families and educating them on these processes. So my caution coming from the department, where we are working on these issues and have the same concerns. You started, Senator Padilla, saying this is urgent. We all agree it's urgent. I think that's why the folks that are here. And I just want to make sure that as we move forward in whatever way that is, that the key stakeholders are engaged in those conversations to be sure that something doesn't fall through the cracks again, because it would be a shame to make a change and not have considered all the aspects that we need to look at. And I wanted to just end with relating what Terry was just talking about. It's about the students, and it's about the professional development we provide for teachers, the accountability. There's several factors that feed into that, so to make sure that we're looking at all of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank all of you for your presentations and your patience today. I know it's been a long hearing so far. Again, before turning to public comment, I want to invite Ms. Ellers and Ms. Gable back to the table. Karen, you're welcome to stay as well if you'd like, just for any final observations or comments or thoughts based on the discussion that we've had today, and then we'll turn to public comment.
Okay, I'll start. Well, I guess I just want to start by saying how impressive a hearing this was for me, who sits through a lot of hearings, and how knowledgeable and articulate and wise and well-rounded the speakers were, and how much I learned. So I think this is a fantastic contribution to the public dialogue on this issue. I had three kind of takeaways. The first was just how much is going on in education reform right now. At the federal level, the reauthorization of ESEA and the Common Core efforts, and then our look at our state accountability system and ELD standards here in the state, and that the weighted student formula discussion is happening at the same time of all of this is sort of crazy and scary, but also perfect. So it's the perfect time to weave into these other reform efforts, but also a caution that we need to be careful that we are weaving and meshing and integrating and not putting on blinders and going down one direction without thinking about the interactive effects of all these other efforts that are going on. The other thing that was striking to me is that there was a lot of optimism and positivity and encouragement about the direction that this policy is going, which I haven't been involved in state finance for as long as many people in this room I know, but in the 7 years I've been at the LAO, I haven't heard this kind of momentum behind reform and consensus that there's a need for things to go better and we're on the right track. Details matter, devil's in the details, but I think that that's really encouraging too, that there is some consensus forming that maybe some type of approach like this is a good thing to do. And then listening to the speaker from San Diego, I think it was also, and from the department, Karen from the department, was a good flag that the funding is only a small piece of what we need to be talking about and thinking about, and certainly resources matter and accountability structures matter, but instruction and practices with students and teachers is really on the ground level. However much money we do or don't throw at it is what's going to be the most important thing. So what role there is for the state to help encourage these kinds of best practices and innovative practices that are going on at the ground level, regardless of what technical funding formula we're using.
Thank you. Department.
Thank you, Erin Gable from the Department of Ed. And just what I was struck with, I think that really the devil in the details was something that summed up a lot of what was discussed today. There's a real opportunity in front of the state to think comprehensively and differently about how we want to ensure the best outcomes and access for our English language learners, and to use the governor's proposal as a platform to have those really frank conversations about the systems we currently have in place. I think you heard a lot of the push and pull that we have, whether it's vis-a-vis our current system or any new system we might put in place. There's the question of making sure we realize all of these fiscal changes need to be in the context of programmatic reform, and realizing that we aren't engaging in any of these changes for a fiscal policy's sake. We're engaging in it for a student outcome's sake. We're trying to make the system more effective for the students that we're trying to reach, and to think about that as we engage in each of these decision points. To be very wary of a narrowing of our focus on systems that may be inadequately designed in order to support where we're trying to go is a cautionary note I heard in some of the testimony we heard. The issues of building on a platform of a very young longitudinal student data system, building on the CELT, building on some of these systems that are currently in place that weren't necessarily designed to take us to the next level in terms of student accountability and outcomes-based measurements, to be very wary of that, to make sure that we don't build whatever the next generation of the system is on a weak foundation, but that we build up that foundation to be adequate to serve the purposes we're looking for. To be very also wary of creating perverse incentives, so to speak, around designation, but also being wary of the how much we narrow our focus on testing. One clear message we've heard from the governor that I know the superintendent feels very strongly about as well is this continuing narrowing on a very small band of tests that were not designed to have so much incredible pressure put on them, and adding CELT into that bailiwick, the possible problems we could create by doing that, to be conscious of that. But just all in all, also the push and pull between this conflict about monitoring versus not monitoring. Depending on who you heard from in your panels, there was a difference in opinion about whether or not we want to monitor more or monitor less, monitor more specific things, monitor less specific things, give more flexibility or not. This is a really fundamental crossroads for the state to think about what we want for our students and what we think is the best research-based way to get there, and what are the levers we need to have in place at a state level to ensure that responsibility is carried out, and to have that based in not only in transparency and having it in a transparent way, but also to make sure we're looking at regional, district, and school-based areas of influence, that it's not just all at the school level.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hope the desire to have you all stick around and offer your comments at the end was abundantly clear, because it's the department that we're going to turn to at some point for implementation issues, not just initial ideas and recommendations. Obviously, the LAO's office, who we turn to for research and policy options for the legislature to continue. I'm just I know he's busy, but it would have been great to have Nick Schweitzer stick around from the Department of Finance, because they're the ones that advise the governor on the budget, and either the policy that follows the numbers in the budget or lack of policy that follows the numbers in the budget. But I'm sure he'll get a Cliff Notes version of our outcomes today. So just thank you for your participation, and look forward to our ongoing work together. We now are at the point of the agenda where we invite members of the public to come address the committee. And thank you for your patience. It's been a long hearing, but I hope a constructive and fruitful one for you. As you come forward, please introduce yourself. Let me make the announcement in Spanish as well. If I knew 100 other languages, I'd make them in 100 other languages. Es la oportunidad para miembros del público que desean compartir sus pensamientos, sus recomendaciones con el comité. Por favor, pueden venir adelante a este momento, y anunciamos más temprano si ocupan traducción. Por favor, déjenos saber y se puede proveer. Let's start here.
Chairman Padilla and members of the select group, my name is Marlene Wilson, and I'm a retired educator and an education advocate. Currently, I work as a consultant for nonprofits and other districts, and I work in a district that was 80% English language learners. I have 3 comments from all that I heard today. One has to do with the issue of reclassification. If a reclassified English learner is expected to academically be able to function equally or better than their English language counterpart, there has to be, or there must be, a very clear, consistent, specific, mandated criteria. As I go through the districts, I see criteria that ranges from only the CELT to very stringent criteria that does not allow children to reclassify. And it doesn't have to be the CELT or the CST, but we must have criteria and an assessment to check on academic achievement of English learners in English, not just language, but more than that. And my second comment has to do with parents, which is the core of the work that I do. Parents of English learners and in general are given information, very, very weak information on their children's achievement, and specifically on reclassification. They are told their child has reclassified or not reclassified, and they're made to sign a form. And sometimes their children do not graduate, and they're told that they can't graduate because they didn't reclassify. There has to be a system, there are systems by which the parents need to be trained and taught and ask comprehensible questions on the entire process, from initial identification to program development to reclassification, and specifically reclassification, because this is a very complex process. We spend a lot of time with teachers, but we do not spend any time with parents. And when parents are asked, when parents ask a school system, why isn't my child reclassified? The response from a district is usually, well, he doesn't know enough English, but it's too late and he can't graduate. And that's too late. So I think it's important that the parents are involved. And my final comment has to do with funding. I think that the funding for special populations, special English learners, needs to have some strings attached. Short of that, you're going to have districts spend the specialized funding on just anything. I worked in a district for 35 years, and you find ways to use the money and to make it qualify, but it's not really focused. It needs to have some requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chairman and members, elected members. Thank you for thank you for this opportunity for us to be here today. My name is Cindy Loyang, and I am an advocate for Fresno Center for New American, established in 1991, which to respond to the growing needs of the Southeast Asian population in Fresno County. We agree that many immigrant parents do not know how to navigate the Western education system. It's a very complex system, and but they do know that that education do play a very important role of creating a better life for their families. Many Southeast Asian families come to this country with very little knowledge of the Western education, and actually coming from a very suppressed countries where they think that the less they say, the better it is. But, so they're not going to be likely to be assertive and advocate for their children's learning process. Yet, their children are often overlooked and underserved. They're actually the population, part of the population of English learner in this country. Our students are expected to thrive in schools, even when schools are lack adequate staffing and support for the Southeast Asian families. For the past 3 years, our organization has worked to educate our families on English learner, EL policies and practice in Fresno Unified, so that they can become more knowledgeable and active participant in their child's education. We do know that they've gained valuable knowledge, skills, and confidence to advocate for their child's learning process. And they're starting to ask questions to have the open communication with the schools so that they could better support their child at home. We see that the parents are more engaged in school, such as participating in parent-teacher conference and asking the right question. Make sure that they actually ask the right question regarding to their child's academic progress. And even participating in ELAC, even though these are very complex, to us, it's a very simple. It is a simple system, but to the Southeast Asian population, when they're coming from a very, very little education background, these are very complex systems that they have to be able to navigate through. So their involvement is helping to create a better equity for underserved students, ensuring our schools are more responsive to families. We know that these worthy efforts are making great impact in families and school, but schools still need greater support to meet the needs of English students' population. As you consider various ways to bring greater attention and resource to California's English learner students, we hope that you're strongly considering building the capacity of school to engage our Southeast Asian population, not just sending a letter home, but taking an active role in reaching out to the parent and teach them the process, because the reclassification process of, as Merlin said, it's a very complex. And so having them to really go out there and educate our parents on this process, so that way they could better support their children at home. And so we could actually, so our student can actually perform better So we could actually engage more. The parents could engage more with the schools, and to also preserve the communities such as ELAC and DLAC, because these are very crucial and key committees that our parents need to be part of, because these are the programs that their childs are receiving from. And so we hope that you consider this into when you guys are making the decision on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Dawn Kepke with McHugh Kepke and Associates on behalf of the California Council for Adult Education and the California Adult Education Administrators Association. And we appreciate the comments and discussion today. However, one of the important components that we think, critical components that's missing from the dialogue, is related to the parents, who are oftentimes, in most situations, English language learners themselves. And this is where I'd like to inject a conversation about adult education and how adult education, as it relates to English language learners and the English as a second language programs that adult education offers throughout communities in California, is going to be significantly hurt relative to the weighted student formula and the consolidation overall that's proposed within the governor's budget. The governor's budget does propose to consolidate adult education as a categorical and does not provide any assurances that there will be funding for adult education in these programs going forward. Adult education schools have been working collaboratively with K-12 districts for many years now across the state to provide academic skills, basic skills, family engagement skills, literacy, proficiency, English proficiency for the parents of the various students that really has been the focus of today's discussion. And research shows that parents who do have proficiency on their own, those students, their children, excel even further than otherwise they would. And we're highly concerned that the erosion of adult education programs, just under the flexibility proposal in the governor's budget in 08-09, is having a seriously detrimental effect on adult education programs and the ability to offer ESL classes in the communities. Just since 2010, we've seen over 30 adult school programs close that otherwise were offering these types of programs and classes, and certainly providing benefit for the communities. I'll just leave it with 40% of children in California who are born to immigrant mothers And adult education has played a historical role of success in helping these immigrant populations, these mothers, integrate, assess their possibilities, gain language skills, proficiency, that ultimately translates to their children's education as well. And it would be a serious detriment if we allow the proposal to continue as currently proposed without separating adult education, acknowledging the benefits and the fact that adult education serves a completely different population who will have nowhere else to go for English as a second language programs and services absent adult education programs, which, as we're seeing, are closing, and many will ultimately be closing at the end of this school year, much less if this proposal is cemented going forward. So we strongly encourage you to take a look at that and consider that as you go forward in debating these issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Stephen Rhodes. I represent Santa Ana Unified. Maybe our approach is probably a little bit different than most. We are in support of the governor's proposal. We recognize there are some changes that should be made, and we've talked to the Department of Finance about those. Transportation, for example, and also the grade weights. We've looked at the categorical programs, and the categorical block grants do disadvantage the English learners, but by and far the big advantage is the weights, and the weights focus dollars on English language learners and children who are eligible for the free and reduced lunch. You have a computer run there, and we assumed that, let's assume that the governor's proposal is implemented 100% in 2012-13. English learner children would get about $1,000 more per child, $1,000 more. And the same thing is also true with children of free and reduced lunch. The legislative analyst office said early, 8%. That $1,000 would represent almost 19-20%. If you want money directed at the schools that have a lot of English language learners and have a lot of children on free and reduced lunch, you want to support the governor's proposal. I think I'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, not afternoon anymore. My name is Cheryl Ortega, and I'm the Director of Bilingual Education for United Teachers Los Angeles, which is the largest local teachers organization in the state. And I'm here also echoing the position of the California Teachers Association, which is we certainly do applaud the interest and the attention that is being given to the huge category of students that are English learners, that they've been a group that has been maligned and has suffered for as long as I've been teaching, which is 42 years. And I think it's marvelous that there is this attention paid to it. I'm going to say, however, that we think both organizations believe that that some continued examination, some continued study, and not acting precipitously would be in the best interest of those children. The biggest reason being the need for the money to stay in the categories. It just seems to happen too often that when monies go into general funds, they disappear for the group of people for whom they were intended. And we just don't want to see that happen again. In California, we have missed the mark so many times with that group of children, with those English learners, that we just don't want to see that happen again. We want it done right. We absolutely do. It seems counterintuitive, but we always talk about local control as being a good way to help the most number of people, but it just doesn't seem to happen. Every time we talk about local control, money disappears. It doesn't get to the intended recipients. I want to just take 1 minute to address a thing that we've been talking about today, and this is that reverse incentive. It confounds me. The discussion confounds me because in all of the years that I have been teaching, and most certainly since about the year 2000, when NCLB has kicked in, I have seen nothing but obsession with reclassification, not not the reverse of that, not reclassifying. Every memo that has come from the top level, superintendent, local superintendents, directors, principals, everything is to push for the quickest and biggest number of reclassified students possible. It also confounds me, for instance, that Los Angeles Unified School District claims that our reclassification increased by 10% in a 1 year's period, and that just again astounds me and confounds me. 10% higher in a single year. So, gee, did we get that much better at getting those kids ready, or did we change the criteria, or what is it that happened exactly that would account for that many more kids reclassifying in a single year's time? LAUSD just completed our 1 year's work of a new master plan for English learners, which was submitted to the Office of Civil Rights a month ago, has come back, and we're going to be presenting it to our own Board of Education. And some concerns that I have about it, and I would have the same concerns about any kind of policy that would come from the state, is who is professionally developing, if you will, the people at all the levels. Who is instructing the superintendent on what's in it? Who's instructing all the local superintendents, as larger districts have? Who is instructing directors, principals, and then entire school staffs on the document itself, on the implications of the document? The monitoring and the accountability piece of that is enormous and needs to be worked out and actually included in the rollout of the document itself. And then lastly, I just want to say something about the long-term English learners, is that, you know, a child has two things to do in school. They need to learn English, and they need to learn the curriculum. And we can't wait for them to learn English at a proficient level before we give them access to core curriculum. That's not reasonable. That's unfair to the child, and, by the way, is illegal according to Lao. So we have to make accessible to them that curriculum immediately, the day they walk into kindergarten. They need to start having that kind of access. So, Senator Padilla, don't give up on our English learners. The policies that we currently have do need to be changed, but in the right way. And as I said initially, we recommend a delay in adapting the weighted formula, and because of the many, many details that just need to be worked out and done well, and then we will certainly support it.
We're not giving up. That's why we're here. Thank you for being here. Young ladies up front. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senator Alex Padilla and committee members. My name is Angelica Garcia. I am a student at Sacramento City College and a former ESL student. I'm here to talk about my experience while in ESL. I was in ESL classes from 1st grade to 4th grade. However, I was not in ESL for kinder, which was a nightmare for me. I did not understand my teacher. I couldn't communicate with her. All I did was stay quiet. When I was switched, I couldn't be happier. I was in a classroom where my teacher understood me, she knew how to speak my language, and my peers were in the same level as I was. I no longer felt dumb. And I was more comfortable to ask questions. Last year, we tried to enroll my 4-year-old niece in my old elementary school, Edward Kemble, that's here in the Sacramento City-fied School District. But they no longer had the classes that I had taken. Now my niece is struggling just as I was when I was her age. My experience here in ESL was great. That is why I strongly encourage funding for ESL. There are hundreds of students like myself that benefit from it and need it in order to be able to learn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator and committee members, my name is Maribel Castañeda. I am a junior at Sacramento City College. I am a former Puente project member. Puente is a 1-year program that encourages minority students to pursue and transfer into a 4-year university. Puente is comprised of 2 classes, Human Career Development and English Writing 100 and 300. I'm currently in English Writing 300. However, I have to take 2 extra ESL writing classes because my grammar is in college level or is in up to par to the English Writing 300 standards. Now, I wonder why this problem wasn't addressed earlier in my high school years, or why wasn't I in ESL in my high school? Spanish was my first language, and the elementary school that I went to had bilingual classes, but there was no transition into middle school and high school. I appreciated my elementary school, not only because it had bilingual program, but also because my mother worked there. She worked as a paraeducator in the bilingual program with the preschool through 2nd grade teachers. I could tell that my mother's presence at that school was highly appreciated with their mediation between parents and teacher conferences. However, because of the recent cuts, she has lost her job of 20 plus years. And because of the new cuts, now she's just waiting for the pink slip to come in. We are struggling with our mother, facing homelessness and distress because of the cuts. Also, her health is worsening. If she doesn't get better, or if she doesn't find another job soon, I will have to put on hold my college in order to help take care of my family. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and I hope that when you look into the funding structure, that you take into consideration the parents, the students, the teachers, the staff, and their families who will be affected. Thank you again for your time, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Senator Edgar Sasueta on behalf of Los Angeles Unified School District. I'll try to be very brief. We just wanted to thank you for for having this discussion today. It's not often that we get to have a chance to have this kind of comprehensive discussion through the traditional legislative or budgetary process. So I think all of us that were here took a lot away. On the merits of the formula, I'll actually associate myself with Mr. Rhodes, who just spoke a little bit a while ago. You already heard a little bit about what's going on in Los Angeles, so I'll reserve that for another day. Our superintendent came to testify before the Senate Budget Committee about a month or so ago, and in short, he made it very clear that he felt that this formula, this policy is a step in the right direction. Concentrating resources on English learners and students in poverty is obviously the right thing to do from a policy standpoint. While we don't think the formula is perfect today, we do, and we have offered many suggestions both to the administration, to the legislature. We'll share those with your office and with the rest of the committee. We do encourage the legislature as a whole to, again, not give up on this proposal. You're going to hear from a lot of different sides, and it shouldn't be underemphasized how big of a policy shift this is, and this is a big set of reforms, and with that, it'll be difficult, but we do appreciate your willingness to move this discussion forward, and we want to be as helpful as possible. One last thing, as the superintendent stated a couple weeks ago, districts in general will obviously embrace the flexibility, but it's not lost on us that could also, have unintended ramifications or implications. So we, as the superintendent stated, we will embrace that flexibility, but we do get that there needs to be certain safeguards, if you will, tied to the reform. So we'll embrace that. We hope we could be helpful as this process moves forward, and we thank you again for the discussion today.
Thank you.
Good evening. Sergio Cuellar, California for Justice, and also the Campaign for Quality Education. In recent weeks, we've brought students out to both the Senate and the Assembly hearings on this subject matter. And one thing that we've heard over and over, and that's been a really frustrating point for our students, has been to hear that it's not the time to make this shift now, right? We've heard from some suburban districts who serve a small population of English language learners and students in poverty who have been claiming inequities of the new system. The funny thing is that our students who are low income and English language learners have been behind that 8 ball for years and years to come, right? And they've been here struggling to succeed and haven't had a voice in having some equity for them and their schools. So it's time we do that. There's no better time to make that shift than now. A student-weighted formula is a much more equitable and simpler formula that will do what the current system is not doing or has failed to do for our students. The current system has consistently kept our state's EL learners from receiving a high-quality education, has had them struggling to succeed, and again, we need to have and assure that these students get educated and are prepared for colleges and career. As our state constitution says, they all deserve and have the fundamental right for a quality education. A student-weighted formula will provide adequate funding for these students, our most needy in the state, and provide consistency in the ways that we fund students all across the state. That's very important for us, as we've seen that English language learners on one end of the state compared to other English language learners on the other end of the state may have very different courses of study and even plans as to how to educate them. So in order to make this the most effective, we also want to make sure that the way the student funds follow the students to the school site. Giving full flexibility to districts is not the right answer. We want to assure that these students receive the money at the school site and that they go to the students that they're intended for. That is why we agree that a targeted flexibility system will make sure that this funding system goes to the students, and again, that the districts and the students will receive full funding and benefits of these funds as they are intended to do. So again, we are for the weighted student formula system. We recommend a targeted flexibility to ensure that students get the money at their school site and it follows them to the school site. And just one thing, that we cannot wait to make this shift for our students who are currently struggling in the system now. Their lives and their education deserve to be more than just a political talking point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. My name is Linda Rivera. I'm retired. I worked at the California Department of Education, and I monitored programs for English learners for many years. I would like to speak on two things. One, there was a question about long-term English learners. And what I've seen statewide, what is common practice, is that districts withdraw support once a student hits intermediate. Once the student hits intermediate on the CELT, the same focus isn't provided to the student for teaching English. District schools often do a good job for beginning ELs, but the explicit ELD and explicit language instruction falls by the wayside once students become older. And that seems to be very common. The other thing is that I've heard a lot about how districts, schools are embracing the flexibility. I beg you to consider the students first. This is more than just about the flexibility for the districts and the schools and about what's comfortable for the districts and the schools. We have an obligation to ensure that all students achieve the same challenging academic standards. So I would weigh in on doing what's right for English learners before I would for the schools, and strengthening monitoring first. It has to be there in the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this initiative. My name is Julio Gonzalez. I'm with the California League of United Latin American Citizens. This is California State Legislative Liaison. I'm going to share 3 points. And the first point is that as part of LULAC's charter, we advocate for full enfranchisement of Latinos in the democratic process. Fundamental, which I haven't heard here all day. We keep talking about this as if it's just a process or a governmental agency. Is that fundamentally the process is the ability to communicate in English in the democratic process for the California Republic. We need to have that. These kids, I reiterate, I second what the gentleman behind me said, is that it's fundamental to their lives, it's fundamental to their economic livelihood. This goes for Latinos and other minorities who struggle with English. And it's just not said enough. Secondly, I've personally met with some parents from different districts throughout California, and some of the there is anecdotal evidence that some of these issues with the funding is happening today. And even with, I can say, a little bit of worry or concern is that when some parents do try to figure out where these monies are going, they get intimidated by their local school boards. There isn't any accountability. So I definitely, when I'm looking over the initiatives and the bills that you've proposed, having some of that control, having some sort of overarching authority over the school districts rather than the separate tapestry of all these different programs for English learners is definitely a good thing. Thirdly, I'll share my personal experience that I struggled with English all the way through the 7th grade. It wasn't until the 7th grade that I actually hit my stride. The first 3 years were very uncomfortable, were very hard. I had wonderful parents, but they themselves were English learners. So I can speak from experience that fundamental to my career in education and being able to graduate from University of California at Davis was essential that I master English. And that is what's missing here. I just don't hear it. We talk about money, we talk about this, we just don't hear about the kids. It's about a child who needs to be a part of this great country. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Senator Padilla and members of the committee, thank you very much. My name is Norm Gold. I have about 35 years in the field of working with English learners. I worked 21 years at the California Department of Education as the chief of the unit for English learner accountability. And the last 12 years I've been providing technical assistance, system audits for school districts, mainly in California, around this area. I'd like to comment on 2 or 3 items regarding the weighted formula and recommendations for flexibility. While it's redundant, because a couple of speakers have already mentioned it, I think it is absolutely essential to keep in mind that your colleagues and maybe some of you over the years have wanted these programs to work directly for English learners and students in poverty. That's why a substantial amount of state funds were put aside for EIA, for example. Even without the flexibility, I see in my work, as some others have commented, school districts facing extraordinary pressures for their general fund, actually taking these funds and making use of them not for that targeted population, including the issue of making sure that parents have the right training, support to participate in English learner advisory committees and district advisory committees that enable them to grow in their understanding of our educational system and to support their own students. So I would just urge that there be great caution in moving ahead with this proposal, as much as it seems like the momentum has built up with the governor's proposal, that this flexibility ought to be delayed until there is a clear, unambiguous allocation of resources for monitoring to make sure that these resources get to their targeted recipients, those students and their families who really need and deserve specific services. The example of adult education should be really instructive here. It was put into the flex of categorical funds, and now in district after district, those adult ed programs are disappearing. It's no surprise. School districts say, here's a chunk of money, we need it, we're going to use it for something else. And there's no recourse now for many, many thousands of adults who need these services, including the parents of current ELs. The last point I'd like to leave with you about targeting of resources and monitoring has to do with the targeted professional development that's needed for administrators and teachers to make sure that our wonderful bank of information that we now have, that we didn't have 3.5 decades ago when I started my work, in terms of research to support best practices for English learners, we desperately need to make sure that professional development is targeted to administrators and teachers so that they can learn about these best practices. The Department of Ed published a very comprehensive volume 2 years ago, research-based approaches for English learners. There's now a body of evidence that can be called the science of English learner services. We need to have our schools understand it, and they won't understand it unless targeted professional development and coaching is included in the expenditures of schools and school districts. And these are two essential areas to make sure that we get full implementation of best practices for English learners. And my fear, knowing what's happened in schools and districts over the last few decades, is that these funds will be seen as a welcome contribution to the districts, but they won't be used for the needs of English learners unless there is a clear monitoring and direct involvement by the state in ensuring that they reach those students. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Arnulfo Hernandez, and let me say, first of all, a disclaimer. I don't claim to have any expertise in the area of the weighted student formula, Senator Padilla, nor do I claim to be an expert in the area of education. I am a lawyer, and so I do know how to use experts who have the expertise in these areas. I am also a former English learner. When I came to El Paso at the age of 9 years old, my parents are U.S. soil-born citizens. My mother was one of those children that went back to Mexico and taken out of the second grade out of the Santa Ana Unified School District back in the 1930s during the Depression era. And I also am testifying today on behalf of and as the state civil rights officer for the American GI Forum. The American GI Forum is the only congressionally chartered veteran organization. Our motto is adequately put, education is our freedom, and freedom should be everybody's business. Our standing to appear before you is the fact that the Mexican American was the most highly decorated identifiable ethnic group during World War II with the most Congressional Medal of Honors and many more below that, and it continues to today. If love of country and shedding blood for country, then our group stands second to none and equal to all. Senator Padilla, I heard you say initially that you were surprised by the number of people that were in attendance today. Let me assure you, you should have no surprise because of that. This issue resonates in the entire state of California and certainly within our community. The English learners are close and dear to our heart. Let me say that your hearing has also generated interest. Perhaps the name may become familiar to you, Armando Vasquez Ramos, who is the lecturer and coordinator of the California-Mexico Project at the California State University at Long Beach. He was here with 10 students a while ago. He had to leave to take the students to another matter, but he wanted me to let you know that he brought his students specifically to be here at this particular hearing. My comments, Senator, are addressed to the advisory media, which I received from your office, and I quote, will the new fund, now I got to put my glasses on now. Will the new funding be monitored to ensure accountability, and how do we ensure that these funds will be used effectively and help English learners gain proficiency and become career and college ready? I'll go right to my comments in bullet form because I see the time is late. I think accountability is a top priority, not only as to the state's oversight, compliance with the federal guidelines, but also it has been mentioned in a different context, but accountability is to the parents. They do not understand what is going on, and they have a stake in this whole. It is their children, and there should be an accountability to that, and that accountability is that there must be either translators available to them. In Spanish, whatever is occurring must be sent to them, and they must be part of the entire process of transitioning the English learner into mainstream. As I understand it, there are 4 criteria to reclassify the English learners. The other ones are important, but let me just focus on 2, is how well they do on the CEL test. That's one. The other one is, and this is the one that I am harping on, is the parent opinion and consultation. It is, at least to me, that they are unaware that they have a right to have an input into whether their children are to be classified or not, either because the districts do not know of that obligation that they have to tell the parents, which I'm not sure that might be the case, or they just don't know it. I don't know. In either case, the parents don't get involved, and they should be. I think the new formula Senator, that you're working on must address other factors as it relates to English learners. First of all, and it has been mentioned before in different contexts very quickly, the elementary school curriculum and materials that weren't designed to meet English learners. By that I mean we need to get away from the pobrecito syndrome. I think we need to challenge these kids. I have seen kids, by the way, Senator Padilla, I have spent a lot of time in classes in schools, and I still do as a volunteer helping kids on the so-called street law program and other matters. But when I see kids do very well in AP classes in Spanish and they get credits for college, and yet they're put into remedial classes, if you will, in history and English, which is the 4th grade level, it doesn't make sense at all. Secondly, there's a lack of appropriate curriculum and materials, perhaps one and the same I just mentioned. And I do believe that there is a shortage of teachers prepared with the knowledge and skills to effectively teach long-term English learners. Someone said it much more professionally, poetically. They said, building teacher capacity. That's what we're talking about. And I think there has to be more intervention and support classes for parents and for the students as they progress to the schools. And finally, I think they should be allowed to participate in elective courses. The students, as you and I well know, education is, for us anyway, and for all students, is best learned when it is relevant to us. And I think participating in things like street law, which I participate in out of McGeorge School of Law, in criminal cases, administrative cases that we prepare for these kids, or civil cases that are very relevant to them, makes them want to learn more of what we're trying to teach them. And part of what we're teaching them is, of course, the Socratic method to be able to analyze problems, which they can go into other ones. Let me just finally indicate, Senator, that, let me just finish it up. That, as you well know, it has been civil rights legislation and court action which has been necessary in the past against school districts because they, of their own volition, do not want to make changes to address the needs of the English learners. Let me say that the American GI Forum stands ready to form and to join in the challenge to those school districts that fail to address English learners. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for some incredible patience and participation today. I hope you agree that this hearing has been not only thorough but informative. We touched on a lot of subject matter in the last few hours. I want to take a second to thank and recognize both the Sergeant at Arms, who's been with us every step of the way. I think he's working overtime now. As well as James Schwab from my office, seated to my right, for helping organize the hearing logistically and otherwise. And just to reiterate, I think a point that we're all agreeing on, the governor's proposal has created an opportunity. But we have some work to do, that if we are going to make the shift to the weighted student formula, that it be done right. And this hearing is an important part of that. Not only informs me as an individual legislator and this committee as a select committee, but through it in our report to all members of the committee and all legislators for that matter, and will inform the budget process over the next several months and the policy process, both the balance of this legislative year and in future legislative sessions. This was actually the first formal committee of this select committee. There's been previous hearings in previous years through the auspices of other select committees that, I'll be honest, we use sort of a stretch and a leap in terms of a nexus to have English learner specific conversations. But this year, thanks to Senator Steinberg and the Rules Committee, we have a specifically focused Senate Select Committee on English learners. And while this was the first hearing, by no means is it the last. As we all can take away from the conversation, that we try to focus specifically on the budget proposals and what it would mean for English learners. We clearly touched on a number of issues, including classification and reclassification and the criteria, not only what would be the best criteria and the status of the current criteria, but the consistency or lack thereof from district to district throughout the state. I think in future hearings we'll also touch on the actual curriculum and instruction for English learners and room for improvement there. Another clear theme that came from today, the role of parents and parental involvement and how to strengthen that piece. Professional development and the teacher pipeline as an opportunity to build on success we've seen in San Diego and Fresno and other areas. We've identified the need for a coordinated statewide plan for English learners, not just a master plan for education in general, and not just a requirement for master plans for English learners county by county, but a coordinated statewide strategic plan for English learners. We heard about the CELT today, and not just the CELT, but general observations about the role of standardized tests and testing. I want to take a second just to acknowledge the concern that some may have, including the governor, about putting too much weight or emphasis on a particular test as a measurement to advance or measure success or not. Let me also counter that with saying we shouldn't put too much weight on a test for keeping a student back. We discussed today at times whether there's a fiscal incentive or disincentive for reclassification and people seeking to see the quantifiable evidence and not just anecdotal. Oh, I can't help but remind myself and everybody that, among other reports, our own state auditor, in their review of English learner programs, reviewed cases of students, and in their findings, 62% of students who were otherwise eligible to be reclassified, meaning GPA and standardized tests and parental participation and consent, still had not been reclassified. So sometimes test scores are used too much for measurement of advancement and success, and sometimes they're used as tools to not advance students when it may or may not be in their best interest. And I can go on and on. Clearly a lot of issues, a lot of complex issues, a lot of significant issues, but the governor's proposal via the budget has provided an opportunity to really elevate the priority and, in my mind, the urgency of these conversations and policy decisions. So thank you again to all of you for your participation, and until we announce the next meeting of this committee, we ask you to stay tuned. Have a great evening.